And we have a travesty right now, which is that the civil rights groups of the United States are siding with the Obama administration in favor of more of this ranking and sorting because they have bought into this idea that the only way African American and Latino children will be served is if testing proves how terrible their schools are. And so the children are the ones that are going to be ranked and sorted, that are going to be labeled by this system. And in New York State, 70% of the students were labeled not proficient on the Common Core test. It was only, so about 30% were proficient. Only about 7% of the English learners were proficient on these very difficult tests. Only about 18% of the African American students were labeled proficient on these tests. So this is the vehicle for civil rights. This system that labels, ranks, and sorts, that has its roots in the eugenics movement of the 1920s. This is going to be the vehicle that is going to deliver us equity. It is really, it was foolish in 2002 when these organizations signed on to No Child Left Behind with the bland assurances of George W. Bush and Ted Kennedy and George Miller. But it is beyond foolish now that we have had more than a decade of these policies and seen their effect for these organizations to continue down this path. In closing, I just want to talk a little bit about the resistance that's growing. This is one meeting of 1,000 that are taking place across the country this year. There are parents that are organizing. There are students that are organizing. A few months ago, 97% of the high school students in Colorado boycotted the tests that they were supposed to take. This weekend, there's a gathering in Florida of the United Opt-out movement, which Ruth and I are going to tomorrow. There's an organization that Ruth mentioned called the Network for Public Education, which I helped start a couple of years ago with Diane Ravitch. And we are holding a conference in the city of Chicago at the end of April. We're going to be having organizers and activists from all over the country gather to share ideas and share strategies and sort of make plans for growing this movement. Right now, the Elementary Secondary Education Act is up, is finally there's finally movement around reauthorization. And so there's a very active debate. And if you go to my blog this morning, I posted something by Mary Porter here, who wrote a blistering editorial on the position of the AFT in relationship to these bills that are pending. And so this is a very critical time, actually, for us to be really hyper aware and raise our voices even more, because over the next few months, even few weeks, there may be some very critical. There's going to be some hearings held. And the Democrats, unfortunately, are in some ways worse than the Republicans on these issues. The Democrats are more wed to annual testing, to all of these so-called reforms, to this facade of civil rights that they have wrapped themselves around with, that they're marching with hedge fund managers, who are now the new champions of the downtrodden and oppressed. Condi Rice, it's just become farcical. So I hope that, you know, I think what we're seeing is, I want to tell one last story. A few weeks ago, I got some communication from a friend who was working with a group of teachers who are working inside to write a report that was supposed to be delivered to one of the unions. And these teachers did not have any political background. And so they were creating this report, and in the process of creating the report, they started to see how they were being contained and how their ideas were being reshaped and repackaged and made palatable. And this is another, you know, I mentioned the sort of the groupthink and the mind guards. This is another case of mind guarding where there's this, you can say this, but you can't say that. And, you know, you always look for what you can say and what you can't say. Because the chances are, what you can't say is the truth. And so these teachers are in the process of finding their way out. And I see them as sort of a paradigm for the teaching profession that has been contained, that has been coerced, that has been co-opted and channeled into what we can and cannot think, can and cannot say. And I hope that my blog continues to be a place where those voices of truth can escape those limits. And I thank you for joining me tonight. I'm not sure how much time do we have?
It's 8:05 right now, so probably at least 25 minutes or more.
Okay, so if anybody wants to, we'll throw the floor open. If anybody wants to say anything or ask a comment or raise a question. You know what, I'm going to give Monty a little privilege here because Monty, I know, has some news about ESCA, so go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Andy, and that was wonderful. I wrote down a bunch of notes of reports and materials I need from you, so, but the framing was good, and only thing I would say add to that is this cycle went around at the beginning of the 20th century too, with corporate agenda that led to the factory model of schooling. Now we have the computerized factory instead. Instead of low-wage jobs, we might get the no-job model. Capitalism advances.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I really want to say is that the Elementary and Secondary Ed Act that's No Child Left Behind in its current guise, is being reauthorized. It was supposed to be reauthorized 7 years ago. The Republicans are now moving a bill. Now, I find myself in the strange place of saying that there's actually maybe one thing Republicans will do right in the next 2 years. I'm not sure there's another one, but in this case, it is that they will take that bill, and it's pretty clear that if they get their way, and they're in charge of both branches of Congress, the bill that comes out of Congress will, one, end what's called adequate yearly progress. That is the need to judge the progress of all students by test scores. Two, it will end the punishment and sanctions, as mandated by the feds. That doesn't mean Massachusetts won't do it because they love to do that. But we can then fight it and they won't have the cover of federal law. Three, there will no longer be a mandate through the waivers, like what Massachusetts has, that you have to judge teachers on the basis of student test scores. That will be an option and fund it if you want to do it, but you don't have to do it. Again, the protection of federal law disappears. Now what's left that's critical on these components is how much testing is done. NCLB requires testing in grades 3 through 8 every year in reading and math, 3 times, and then once in high school, and 3 times in what we call grade spans, 3 through 5, 6 through 9, 10 through 12 in science. So because of the movement of parents and teachers and students rebelling against this all across the country, 60,000 parents refused to let their kids get tested in New York State last year, opted out. Because of things like that, Congress is actually paying attention. So there's a bill in the House, introduced by a Republican and a Democrat, that would go back to grade span testing instead of testing every year, every grade in 3 through 8. In the Senate, what Alexander did is write in 2 choices. Option 2 is the easy one to describe. It stays the same. Grades 3 through 8, once in high school, etc. And option 1 is gives a range of options to the state. You could keep right on testing, as we do now. Or you could entirely do grade span testing. Or you could do project-based assessing to determine competency, like the state of New Hampshire is trying to do and is steadily getting into a battle with Arnie Duncan over this. You could do a range of formative assessments with your money. I worry about that at the state level, but potentially it could get done right. They also could do what we're calling a system of systems. That is, within a state, you could have a variety of kinds of assessments. They would all have to be, quote unquote, comparable, which they don't define, but which, given what else they've said, logically means you have to show that proficient by one is proficient by another. And if you can do that, you're okay. Now, this is not paradise. It's still too narrow. It's still too limited. But a year ago, we couldn't even have this conversation and get taken seriously. And now we have the chair of the Education Committee in the Senate proposing that as an option. We go back to pre-NCLB. Essentially, the good news is there's now $378 million going to the states to do testing. State could take that money and use half of it and spend it on better assessments, get teachers involved, get collaborative things kind of going in classrooms and in schools so that you can use assessment as real feedback to kids so that they can learn better and teachers can do their job better. So this is now possible. Big obstacle. Arnie Duncan and Barack Obama, very clearly. The Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable and the corporate clowns like Jeb Bush. Unfortunately, the civil rights groups, as Anthony said. I think there's 2 things going on here. 3 things. One, they know that schools in our country have often failed poor kids and kids of color. And they saw the testing as a way to hold schools accountable. What they have then ignored is that the results show, A, you get teaching to the test, narrowed curriculum, and even on test scores, they're not going up as fast as they went up before NCLB. So it doesn't even work. But they haven't paid attention to that. 2, they also get a lot of Gates money. Many of them. Lots and lots of Gates money and other corporate money. And then, my third point was, again, they're not paying attention to the evidence. They're sort of ideologically locked in at this point. Unfortunately also, Randy Weingarten, head of the AFT, reached a deal with another one of these corporate-funded operations, the Center for American Progress, and she's now said, we're okay with testing every grade as long as you only use once in each grade span for accountability. This is calling for something where the Republicans are willing to get rid of the whole accountability structure. Okay? So you have this craziness going on. What are we going to do? What we're calling for, we're working with the NEA, which is now being very good on this stuff. We'll see, but I hope so. They're being very good on it, very strong on the grade span stuff and the other things. We're working with the Center for Popular Democracy. You may remember ACORN. This is kind of a rebirth of them. And various other groups. We're looking to do a few things. One thing we're doing is try to persuade local civil rights groups and state civil rights groups, disability groups, and others. And I would add to that state and local affiliates of the AFT. Got to stand up and say, no, we have to cut back this testing. And we don't care what you say at the national level. We don't agree with you. We've got to change. And then you've got to let Congress know. 2, we are going to set up a website so that everybody in this room and all of your friends and everybody you know and everybody you can reach will send a letter to Congress saying, we want to go to less testing. So that's something we're going to do. If you sign up for CPS, if you haven't already, you'll get that message of when that website is ready. It won't be long. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful talk. It was crystal clear and opened my mind totally to the omnipresence of the Gates Foundation. I had no idea of that power. I have a really tiny question. I wonder if you know what's the relationship between the Gates Foundation and Pearson? And what?
Well, Pearson, what's the relationship between Gates and Pearson? You know, the formal relationship, there's a Microsoft joint venture with Pearson to develop an online sort of, a curriculum that basically would provide teachers with 150 plus days worth of instruction. That's the most obvious formal, visible relationship. I don't know what behind the scenes sort of relationship there is. Gates invested, as you may have heard, a couple $100 million in something called In Bloom, which was originally called the Shared Learning Collaborative. It was supposed to create this data warehouse, this cloud-based data system, where the students would be working on their tablets or whatever. All that data would go up and be available to third-party companies like Pearson. Pearson has a very close relationship with Newton. There's a rather frightening video by a guy by the name of Jose Ferreira that some of you may have seen, where he talks about, it is a 2012 video that was shot in something that the Department of Education hosted called Datapalooza. And can't you just wait for the next one of those to go barefoot running through the data? What he described there, Newton as building, was a means by which every piece of information that students manipulate on their tablets is subject to being captured. And what he said was that whereas Google, for example, you go on Google maybe 2 or 3 times a day and search something, they can collect maybe 10 or 20 data points on you a day. Well, that's what Google's business is, actually. It's not in helping you search for things, it's in collecting data points, which then they can sell to people who want to sell you things or who want to manipulate you in whatever way they do. Newton, this guy Ferreira, said that students working on these devices, you could collect thousands of data points on these students every day. And so that data, then he says that data has tremendous predictive power, because by looking at what the patterns of performance of these students, this then can inform the people that are making the educational software and these data systems, these devices. Now, this is entirely unproven that this accumulation of data actually allows you to personalize instruction in a meaningful way for students and actually help those students learn. In fact, Bill Gates, about a year ago, was interviewed in Los Alamos, and somebody asked him, well, what's happening with educational technology? Are you seeing, is it really paying off? Are we seeing? He said, well, it actually hasn't worked out as well as we had hoped. We're not getting the results we hoped for. He said, the problem is it seems to work really well with highly motivated students, but it doesn't work so well with unmotivated students. And he said, You know, the one thing we have a lot of in this country are unmotivated. And so, you know, first of all, I think that's bullshit. And second of all, this is from the architect of no excuses teacher evaluation. What teacher was able to say, note on their VAM evaluation, well, I did fine for the motivated students. You know? So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if he wants to hold teachers accountable with that one statement, he has declared his entire enterprise unaccountable.
Okay, on in Bloom, how many actual classroom teachers are in here? See, so we just went through this today, right? So Massachusetts has ThinkGate, a private corporation that's running our Edwin program. I just want to know while I'm here, have other people encountered it yet? ThinkGate and Edwin. Okay, Edwin is the DESE data bank, and it claims to have those capabilities that Gates was claiming. And my district, Revere, is a pilot district. I mean, we're doing park and all that stuff, and our superintendent is about to retire, I guess, to a 6-figure consultancy. But so ThinkGate was able last year, it had all my students' rosters, it was able to push out through their iPads tests to the individual students, and the results would go straight to ThinkGate. Okay, and the data test bank, this is a DESE project, and we were piloting it, and it was due to be rolled out in 2015, and they delayed it after the pilot thing. People in my school, I'll tell you frankly, I wouldn't do it. I was required to push a test out to my kids through the thing, and I said, oh, can't get it to work. But I don't know, see, because am I lucky? Because I'm right there at the forefront? Because we get a grant from Nellie Mae to take Pearson training in our, they just lobbied to destruction, just lobbied away. Sally Mae did, the Reform Student Loans. And they have a wholly owned charitable foundation, which gives money to Massachusetts schools to flip our learning over to Pearson, to hold us accountable to Pearson. So I want to say about any new accountability, accountable to whom? If you want to say accountable to whom, whatever district-determined measures I am now required to push out to my students through an iPad, and the contract went to Ohio, ThinkGate, the DESE avoided Massachusetts, quote, procurement, obstructionist procurement laws, and sent the contract out to Ohio. And that's where ThinkGate is getting our data. And that's what Edwin is on your DESE site. And you know, we get a thing, free professional development from ThinkGate. It's a private corporation, and it's already in place. My students' rosters are in their data banks. And they can push straight to my students. So when we say accountability, I'm going to finish. When we say accountability, and Anthony talks about, well, there might be multiple measures. Yes, we have seen them. They are district-determined measures. I get to choose on my own iPad. There is a website in the cloud that can hold me accountable for making a certain number of points of gain and stuff like that in whatever test or assessment they want to push out. They don't have to do anything about statistically proving it or anything. Accountability then becomes personalized. And so multiple measures is no defense. The new definition of accountability has to start with one question: accountable to whom? Who's going to make these decisions? Because this data is going right up. And then as far as NCLB, we don't have to renew the thing. We don't have to take it. Now it's here as the teacher unions are the ones saying keep this monstrosity in place, and the people are saying take it down. We don't have to do that. Do we?
I certainly don't, and I don't intend to, so I'm not going to renew NCLB. Not on my watch. Yes?
I have a question about language, you know, about the teachers are great. and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It's the word poverty being an issue. When I hear people talking about poverty, I hear paternalism, charity, I hear the old culture talk back to Moynihan. I hear a lot of white people coming in from elite class strata, teaching kids of color how to be, more articulate and have more words for them. So what's the alternative? And I feel like our movement this week has a lot to learn from students who have, the young people have recognized this is about repression. This is about stealing our neighborhoods. And I'm thinking about the Atlantic article on the case for reparations. This was about, you guys stole our space, and now you are repressing us in it. So please don't say, and the danger, of course, is we want pre-K, we want better resources, but is there an alternative to the culture of poverty talk?
Yeah, there certainly is, and I think it's something that has to be developed a lot more. I think, and it's difficult for me to articulate it really fully because it's kind of like Malcolm X said. When some white person said, how can we help your people? He said, well, go back and work with your people. So in a sense, that's part of the paradox that educators face, especially those of us who want to, who work in communities with a lot of poverty and with racial isolation and so on. It's very clear that paternalistically coming in and setting high aspirations for other people is not an empowering thing. It's clear that having revolving doors of recent college graduates come in and plaster the school with, Brown University flags is not going to transform these neighborhoods into little academic havens, but I think the alternative is really empowerment, and that requires that those communities become self-determined, to become empowered, and that's difficult for me. I can't give that to somebody. I think that was sort of Malcolm X's point, is that you can't give that. So. So is that Malcolm? Anyway, God, I was just going to get to something. Yes, I was talking about empowerment, and the other thing I was going to say was, I think the one thing that we have to really be clear on is the reason people are in poverty is because they don't have money. And that money went somewhere. And so people aren't in poverty because their parents didn't pull their pants up, or because people are in poverty because there are jobs. The level of youth participation in the workforce is dropping every year. A few years ago it was 60-some%. The next few years it's dropping down to around 50%. And that stretches up into the 20s. That affects young people's looking around themselves and seeing, are there any opportunities for me? Or where are the opportunities for me? Are they through education? Are they through through work even? And if those if those projections about the number of jobs are true, there was some project that gave young people jobs, and shockingly crime dropped. The number of them that were incarcerated plummeted. So young people need jobs. You know, so we need to advocate for reparations. We need to advocate for investment in our communities. We need to advocate for investment in a way that truly empowers our communities. And that's a tall order, you know, because that requires those communities to be organized, to be able to determine for themselves. So like I said, I'm not, you know, it's hard for me to deliver that. Wow.
Yes, one of the things I've been concerned about and hoping would happen in a big way is the education movement to hook up in a big way with all the other movements that are all related.
Right.
Just what you're saying now is testimony to the fact that we need to expand our thinking to have a huge coalition. That's how movements are made.
Right.
And we're working hard, a lot of people working hard in the education movement. And I know there's people that are hoping that that'll happen.
Yeah.
But I think it's something we really need to work on and consider and expand the movement greatly to all the other movements.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, when you think about the student loans, the fact that student loans have exceeded credit card debt now in the national economy. You look at the incarceration of more than 2 million people, the United States having more than 1/4 of the people in the globe incarcerated are within the borders of the United States, and we have the nerve to talk about other countries, you know, human rights violations when we have people in solitary confinement, you know, and that's an economic issue as well as a political issue. When you look at 1 in 3 people, 1 in 3 African American men can't vote because of felony convictions. Yeah.
Thank you for doing the research and having a communication with Bill Gates. It's really helpful to know how a person thinks who has so much power. It also seems like what you're implying is an agreement with Naomi Klein, that what's needed is a very direct, concrete, and repeatedly repeated critique of capitalism as a method for living in our culture. So if that's really the fundamental educational challenge, what would you say about its chances for success in the kind of culture that we live in which all of us have been propagandized into not questioning the value of capitalism? So could you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always been a tension, or maybe always, but for as long as I've been around, there's been a tension between sort of communitarian responses to crises and individualistic responses to crises, and capitalism as a solution versus capitalism as the source of the problem. And I think we are reaching a critical mass where the number of people who are starting to understand, you know, I think Ruth mentioned it, sort of an awakening, is growing. And the number of people, and when that, you know, somebody said, I can't remember who, that it takes about 10% of the population to wrap their minds around an idea and really start moving that idea. And when that happens, so you don't need to convince the majority of the population that you're right. You need to convince 10 or 15% of the population that you're right and that you have an answer. And I think part of the problem is that ever since the McCarthy era, it has been, when we talk about mind guards, it has been forbidden to criticize capitalism. And capitalism is always seen as the way, some form of capitalism or entrepreneurship or, you know, pulling up by the bootstraps is always seen as the answer to poverty. And, you know, so it's forbidden to talk about tax structures because that's redistribution of wealth. You know, it's forbidden to talk about widespread rights to health care because that is somehow going to de-incentivize people from working because they should be afraid that they're going to die of cancer, and otherwise they won't get a freaking job, And so, we have to move on all of these issues. And I think, it takes a lot, it just takes a lot of work on our parts to, as Bob suggested, connect these different disparate movements, confront the leadership of our own movements, and if necessary, replace the leadership of our own movements, so at least we are not being spoken for. Well, no, present company accepted, of course. But at least so that our, so that we're being spoken for with authentic voices. Sam. Oh, yeah.
A small comment on capitalism. The feds give free money to the banks. Hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars. They loan it out to students at 8 to 10%, and the students become debt slaves for the rest of their lives. And it's done by free money. The banks don't even have to pay any interest to the Federal Reserve now. They're getting, the federal discount rate is 0.
Well, they wouldn't be incentivized to make money otherwise. Yeah.
In the future, if there is up to 50% of students who were determined not to be college ready or career ready, how many of them do you think would be determined to be military ready? Everyone.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. The military certainly is. How many people? The military is what? 3 million is our American military, something like that. So the military doesn't need that many people either these days. The military has been technologized too. They can have a few hundred guys in bunkers in Nevada controlling all of the airspace of Afghanistan. So honestly, I don't know that cannon fodder is sort of, they don't even need cannon fodder anymore. They've got, they can, and with the drones, with these high-speed ballistic weapons now, they've made bombs so much cheaper. I don't know if you've seen this with my son. Look at this bomb. It's like some big iron rod that they shoot at 7 times the speed of sound. And it packs this incredible explosive power. And where it used to have a rocket propelling it, now they just have this, I don't know what this wonder machine is, this death-destructive machine somehow propels this thing at, 10,000 miles an hour, and because the kinetic energy of it is so massive, it does the damage that you used to have to. So, and a pile of iron only cost $10,000 for this bomb, where they used to spend, $100,000 for a bomb. So, I think, unfortunately, where technology is making us we're putting the human being is really being sidelined on a lot of this. And yeah.
Just in terms of bringing the education movement and the economic jobs and so forth movement together, I think the country, suffers from an anti-socialist virus. And for many years, I've been using the term economic democracy.
Sure.
Because I think that that's actually what it is, that a lot of people really like to see happen. And it goes down much more easily down the throats of the American public. And so I think that in talking about almost all of the changes that need to happen, focusing on democracy, so that people can say, yeah, I want to be part of that. I want to help decide what kind of jobs we're going to have in our community. And I want to help decide what kind of quality of education we're going to have in our schools. And I want to decide what kind of health care we're going to be providing. And I think as the country begins to think more about, oh, that can be democracy, then I think people might get interested, as opposed to this scary sort of specter from the past.
I think, okay, we're going to have to wrap it up. Just one
Please
thought.
let me say something. I promise not to make a speech. Because that's what it is, where it comes together with the question about involving the community. What Chicago did, Boston kind of did on the charter school question. The community came together. A couple of years ago, the community was out there about stopping the schools from being shut down. There were meetings, there was whole communities full of people. The parents were there. And what NEA and AFT have in common right now is Jobs with Justice, and they're helping me organize an event in my district, helping us, the teachers, and they're in all of the towns. And so the question of how could people, I don't even know your name, I haven't met you before, I should have your email. How could the actual people, no, seriously, that's where it comes together. If we work with our communities, we say, how do we get to the schools our children deserve? That's what accountability really is. We're responsible to those people. We need to cut off that other conversation and start that conversation that she's having with the community we're in, especially Boston, because you guys moved the needle last spring. I'll stop now, I promise.
Just one, I don't know whether this is the right note to close on, but it might not be possible to get elected in many places as a socialist, but I think I saw a poll that said something like 35% of the people would favor socialism. So I don't know that people are ready to fight for socialism yet, but I think people are getting very fed up with capitalism. And so, and some form of socialism, I think we need to get over our allergy of that term and, start looking at examples of countries that are socialists and that have tax policies that don't give billions of dollars to the wealthy and, exclusively tax the poor. If you want to call that socialist, if that's the worst that you're going to call me, then call me a socialist. I don't care, Yeah, I'm for redistribution of wealth. I'm for taxing the rich. I'm for, investing in communities. I'm for democratic empowerment of communities. And if that makes me a socialist, well, okay, I'm a socialist, So.